At the NFL Combine, John Schneider finally committed to Geno Smith for 2024, or did he? We'll be discussing those comments and more on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12s. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you are listening in nearby Sumner, Washington, or in Gary, Indiana, not too far from the Combine. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The Seahawks descending on the Combine, at least John Schneider and the player personnel group this year, no coaching staff. But we got to hear from John Schneider today. We're going to dive into some key takeaways from both his on-podium and off-podium comments, and then we're going to kickstart our Combine preview. Defensive linemen and linebackers, the first group that's going to start testing on Thursday. They will do media interviews on Wednesday. A lot of really fun prospects that we're going to be diving into on this jam-packed episode, brought your way by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Now for your lead story here on our Tuesday edition, here live from Indianapolis of Locked On Seahawks. John Schneider met with the media for his annual NFL Combine press conference, as well as his off-podium discussion with reporters. And of course, the quarterback situation was brought up multiple times, especially with Geno Smith, and stirring some eyebrows during the podium period when John Schneider was asked about Geno Smith being the starting quarterback right now. He said he is the starter until he isn't, which got some people riled up. But to put some clarification on this is why you need to read everything, right, Rob? This was another quote from John Schneider, literally moments later off podium, speaking with Seahawks beat reporters. I happened to be there when he said, honestly, other people made a bigger deal out of that than we did in the building. It was like, is he going to be here? Is he not going to be here? It was not. He was going to be here. It was a matter of when are we going to tell him we are doing this with his roster bonus. So in other words, this latest development with Geno Smith, where they decided to restructure his contract, he's saying that this was the plan all along and that Geno Smith was going to be on the roster. I don't know how anybody could see this quote and find any ambiguity in it. And I know everybody's going to look at that comment about him being a starter until he's not. But I mean, he was asked, literally the question was, is he the starter right now? And he was just answering the question. I think this other quote, maybe there's still some potential for a trade if somebody sent a deal that the Seahawks just absolutely couldn't refuse. But I mean, Rob, they're going to incur a $27 million dead cap hit if they trade him now after doing this restructure. I don't see how you can look at that quote and think anything other than Geno Smith is going to be on this roster and he's going to be starting for the Seattle Seahawks in 2024.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, Corbin. And that is the value, of course, of you being there in person and actually being able to look the man in the eyes and ask a question off podium that very few others have had the access to be able to see. Anybody who watched John Schneider's interview on the podium that is available on YouTube or NFL Network, and then they hear Greg Bell's question, it's Coleman News Tribune, a buddy of both of ours, and basically asked John about, is Geno Smith the quarterback? Is he the starter basically right now? John's just basically answering the question with the same words that Greg used in that case. So you start to see some of these quotes on Twitter, and all you see is the text in black and white. And I think that it is easy to make an argument that, the Seahawks are not so sure that they are all in on Geno Smith. And some of the things that Mike McDonald, as head coach, has also also maybe been a little bit vague. But, I'm going to go back to another interview that I saw recently with Aaron Levine. Mike Macdonald sat down with him in the VMAC, and Aaron Levine asked some questions about, what Mike Macdonald remembered about his time in Baltimore and what was some of their steps that they would use anytime they're talking with the media. And basically, I'm summarizing here, but Macdonald said there's basically 2 steps to the Baltimore Ravens plan for success in dealing with the media. Number 1 was don't give away all the secrets. And then he just kind of smiles at him because there is no number 2. You're not going to give too much information. Not going to give any more secrets. And that's the thing is I think that the Seahawks are trying to play their cards a little bit close to the vest, which is understandable. I think as John Schneider said, that, just acknowledged during the combine, both on the podium and off, that, they're working a little bit from behind at this point just because they had to do so much work to bring in Mike Macdonald and, of course, the rest of the coaching staff. So I think actions speak louder than words in this case, I think, especially. And the fact that the Seahawks did give that money to Geno Smith, change that roster bonus into a signing bonus. As you said, they would incur a massive cap hit if they were to trade him at this point. Geno Smith, whether you like it or not, Geno Smith is going to be on the Seahawks roster in 2024, unless they make some splashy selection of a quarterback in the first round or something like that, and he beats Geno Smith out, or they bring back Drew Lock and he beats Geno Smith out. But I think that everything that was shown off the podium today, Corbin, just kind of speaks to the fact that number 7 is going to be back in Seattle in 2024.
And I want to take a little bit of a closer look because I do think there's some fans out there, and I understand when you see that first quote that he's the starter until he isn't. Obviously, that raises a lot of speculation. That is a red flag, especially for somebody that looks at a couple words to make an opinion. But again, full context, being there to speak with John Schneider off podium and being able to hear him basically with no disambiguity at all, just be able to come out, hey, Geno Smith was going to be on this team. We just had to decide when we were going to make this move, and they decided before the combine. And I think the timing is fitting. You get this done before you go to Indianapolis, and there's going to be more moves that are going to be coming here in the next few days. There always are when the Seahawks, especially this year with all the coaching stuff, putting them behind the 8 ball a little bit. There are going to be a lot of moves that are made behind the scenes, whether it's players getting cut, trying to get set up for contracts with your own free agents, whatever the deal is. There's going to be a lot going on behind closed doors here, maybe more so than we've seen in past years because of the coaching change and how that's changed the dynamic a little bit for the Seahawks. But I want to look at those numbers real quick just to try to reiterate why I don't see any way that the Seahawks, John Schneider is a shrewd general manager. I just cannot see him eating $27 million in dead cap unless a team comes and says, hey, we'll give you a first-round pick and a couple other picks for Geno Smith. At that point, you'll eat that. But I don't know how you would do that. And just looking at the numbers, Rob, before they did the restructure, Geno Smith's cap hit was $31.2 million. After the restructure goes down to $26.4, he is now the 14th highest paid QB in the NFL in 2024. So he's middle of the pack. That is as good a value as you're going to get for a 2-time Pro Bowl quarterback who is in the top 5 or 6 in nearly every meaningful category over the last 2 years. He has been as consistent as anybody not named Patrick Mahomes in terms of the stats from the last 2 years. And he's got more game-winning drives than anybody in the league. And he is the 14th highest paid based on cap hit. If they would have released him or traded him before the restructure, they could have saved $17 million. But by choosing to make this move, if they traded him now before June 1st, Rob, it would be a negative $600,000 cap charge. So that might not seem like a big deal, but the point is you're not creating any financial relief for yourself by making that move. And why would you restructure him to begin with if you were going to turn around and trade him? So I just don't see there's any way that based on what we've seen here, the cap numbers there, it just doesn't seem to me like John Schneider would have any interest in doing that. And going off the comment, it doesn't sound like he really has wanted to. And that's at least my interpretation.
Well, it's my interpretation as well. And again, it's something that we talked about a lot heading into the combine. And, it's basically been one of the biggest storylines other than, of course, the head coaching search and all the assistant coaches. It's been basically the biggest storyline of this entire offseason here. But now it does feel like this is something that can be kind of put to bed a little bit. Again, I think that's pretty clear that Geno Smith is going to be on Seattle's roster, presumably their their starter. I think that it's also interesting that, again, Schneider and McDonald have both reiterated their interest in bringing back Drew Lock, but why wouldn't you? He's a relatively young quarterback. He's proven his success as not only a backup, but obviously as a starter as well, being the Philadelphia Eagles. And, he's a good guy. He's a guy that has obviously fit in well with the rest of the team. He and Geno have a very good relationship as well. So again, why wouldn't you want to bring Drew Lock back if you can get a salary that is manageable for him? So to me, this is, again, just reiterating what we felt like we knew, but we didn't know for sure. I think that John Schneider put all that speculation to rest with his comments on and off the podium today at the Combine.
As my dad would always say, if there was something that was being speculated that was a bunch of phooey, he would say that this is a nothing burger. And that's what I think at this point with Geno Smith and with Drew Lock. They're going to be meeting with his agent this week, according to John Schneider, another off-podium intel that was provided for us. But it looks like, and I've been saying this all along, based on what we've heard from these coaches, they might not have been as committal as you wanted, but they've made it clear that they'd like to keep this quarterback group together. So I'm really fascinated to see how this plays out in the next few weeks, but I think we can expect number 7 to be under center, and maybe Drew Lock will be back with him. Up next, Geno Smith was not the only topic of discussion for John Schneider. We're going to dive into some other key takeaways from today's press conference in Indianapolis. Don't go away. You're listening to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Locked On Seahawks is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you do if you had an extra hour in your day? For me, I wish I had a bit more time for painting and creating artwork. The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs and can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. Therapy has worked wonders for me in the past when I was dealing with health issues in my family, but don't just take my word for it. Having someone in your corner to guide you when you're struggling to navigate obstacles can be invaluable. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/LockedOn. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at BetterHelp.com/LockedOn. You're listening to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s. Thanks for tuning in here on this wonderful Tuesday evening from Indianapolis. Thanks for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. We just discussed the main topic coming out of John Schneider's annual press conference in Indianapolis today, his comments on Geno Smith, which certainly have divided some fans in terms of interpretation. If you didn't see the second quote or you didn't see the first quote, there was some context that was lost out there. But John Schneider talked about a lot of other things aside from just the quarterback situation, especially off podium. And Rob, looking at the things that Schneider said, and you kind of hinted at it already in the first segment, to me, the biggest takeaway that wasn't Geno Smith related, simply where the franchise is at in terms of their timeline, their schedule for free agency. They are way behind the 8 ball because of how long it took to get this coaching process taken care of.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing, is the fact, again, that the Seahawks are behind, and John Schneider was just willing to admit that, which I think is refreshing. It's one of the reasons why I don't think you have to kind of, really read through the tea leaves with John Schneider as much as maybe it had to do with Pete Carroll in the past. I mean, John kind of shoots from the hip, and his, and basically what he said is that the Seahawks have some work to do at this point. They have not had some of the draft meetings that they normally would have at this point, because again, he's been working so much with Mike Macdonald to create that coaching staff. To me, some of the biggest news is, as you mentioned, is news that came when you and other of the Seattle media was able to get John kind of pulled away from the podium, because anybody who watched the actual podium interview knows that the Seahawks general manager was actually asked more about guys like Dave Canales or Elliott Wolf, and people like that are not part of the Seattle organization, just who John had worked with in the past. But away from the podium, John gave some interesting information on just how much of a priority Seattle's current free agents are. He spoke about Leonard Williams. He spoke about Jordan Brooks. He spoke about Jamal Adams. He spoke about a lot of different topics. Corbin, you were there. Why don't you explain what you heard and your thoughts on those free agents for the Seahawks, as well as any other news that you heard from John Schneider in the mouth himself?
Yeah, I think the thing that, and I'm not going to say it was surprising, but the number of sheer names that were mentioned by John Schneider when he was looking at free agency. Now, did you get specifics on any of these players? No, but I don't blame John Schneider, because, again, they just finished building their coaching staff last week. They are not in the usual position that they have been in, with Pete Carroll being the coach for 14 years. You had your annual end of season meetings with players. There already was that communication window, whether you're going to be a free agent or not. They had their draft meetings set up. A lot of the coaches on Pete Carroll's staff had been on his staff for a long time, so you had that built-in continuity. You don't have any of that right now. And so you're truly starting over. And the coaches, Mike Macdonald, his staff, they're back in Seattle getting ready for an early start to OTAs, with this being a new regime. So they're focused on other things. They have not had a chance to get into the free agency. This is going to be the week that they kickstart all of these things. But John Schneider mentioned Damian Lewis. He mentioned Bobby Wagner, Colby Parkinson, Noah Fant, Drew Lock, a number of different players. And it sounded like, if you read between the tea leaves with the guard and center position, that Evan Brown is a player. Even though he didn't name drop him specifically, he mentioned that they had to have some discussions about those two spots. So all these free agents that they have, they're not going to realistically be able to sign all these players, and they probably shouldn't. You have a team that didn't make the playoffs last year. You want to make some changes to your roster. At the same time, continuity is a good thing too, and they've got some really good football players like Leonard Williams and Jordan Brooks, who are scheduled to become unrestricted free agents. And Schneider basically, without saying it was the top priority, he basically said that Leonard Williams is the top priority because of the second round compensation. When you give up that kind of pick, then you expect to be able to get that guy signed to a contract, because you gave up all you did for him. So him and Jordan Brooks, he wasn't as specific with Brooks. It sounds like that's certainly something they would like to make happen, but he didn't have any tidbits there like he did with Leonard Williams. But those two players, the number of agents he's going to be meeting with this week, a lot of these discussions are finally going to start taking place. Now they have this coaching staff put together, but again, they are starting way later in this process than they normally do. Luckily, they have a GM and now a president of football operations in John Schneider, who has been through this a few times during his time in Seattle.
Yeah, he has been through this many times, of course, and I've been there and had enough conversations with John that I feel like I can kind of read through his comments and basically decipher what his intentions might be. Now, John's savvy. He's by no means somebody that is just easy to read, but at the same time, I don't think that he is one of those who is going to have an awful lot of coach speak necessarily. And so some of his comments on Leonard Williams specifically, I thought were pretty insightful. As you mentioned, I mean, obviously the compensation that the Seahawks had to give the New York Giants when they made the trade in the first place, they sent a second and a fifth round selection to the Giants for Leonard Williams. Obviously, Leonard Williams is going to cost an awful lot of money to be brought back, but you've made the point many times on our show about just how darn good Leonard Williams was once he came to the Seahawks. Again, the cost of bringing him here in the first place. And when John was asked about it, the quote quote I saw, I don't know, have it memorized at this point, but basically he referred to Jamal Adams and basically said, look, just like with Jamal Adams, you make this trade, you're going to want to bring the player back and, and give him a new contract. And so I do think, I fully expect, I am more confident than I was before today that the Seahawks are going to do basically whatever they possibly can, within reason financially, of course, to bring Leonard Williams back. I think that is a big part of their plan. I think that Jordan Brooks is a little bit more of a wild card just because of the fact that he is a younger player, 26 years old, and he is due an awful lot of money. This is not a very good linebacker class, as I've talked about before, and so I do think that Jordan Brooks may have some suitors out there. That said, he's exactly the type of player that you want to bring back. He, of course, has been a 4-year starter for the Seahawks last 3 years in a row, even coming off of the injury as he clips the 100 tackle mark. So he is exactly the type of guy that you want to reward and bring back. So to me, those were the two biggest storylines. I would say this as well, which I thought was interesting. The fact that Schneider mentioned the fact that Abraham Lucas did undergo a knee surgery in the offseason. Hopefully, knock on wood, that means number 72 is going to be back starting for the Seahawks at right tackle. And you can kind of throw that position of concern maybe out the window if, in fact, the Seahawks feel confident that Abraham Lucas is going to be able to make that full recovery.
Yeah, that was the only other injury update that was provided today, aside from Jamal Adams. And I don't even know if I want to say necessarily it was an injury update on Adams coming from John Schneider. He made it clear the struggles that he had last year, getting back from that torn quad tendon, and then every week just trying to get himself prepared to be able to play. And it reached a point late in the season where he just physically could not do that. Now, Pete Carroll was mentioning at the end of the season that they believed another offseason that he was going to be in good shape. As far as commitment goes, this is truly one that I think you can interpret maybe in a number of ways. But for me, the quote from John Schneider today when we were off podium on Jamal Adams, he said, is he in the plans? Yeah, we'll find out. We'll keep working through things. We're still trying to figure it all out. That doesn't sound to me like a general manager that is planning to have Jamal Adams on the roster. And with the cap hit, he's going to have all the injury issues that he's had. And oh, by the way, Jamal Adams tweeted a somewhat cryptic tweet today as well, a couple hours after John Schneider's comments saying, looking forward to the opportunity. This just spells to me that a move that many have already speculated is indeed going to happen. And I would expect it's with a post-June 1st designation that he is going to get cut to open up $17 million in cap space.
Yeah, that's the way I interpreted that as well. Again, to me, this is much easier to imagine a scenario in which the Seahawks cut Jamal Adams loose, perhaps doing some type of move where they are able to spread the remainder of his contract out, so the salary cap, the dead money hit that the Seahawks would take would be spread out over the 2024-2025 seasons. I think that's a possibility, but I would be surprised if Jamal Adams is part of the Seahawks moving forward. I think there's a possibility still, and I'm as intrigued as anybody about what a healthy Jamal Adams could do. I'm sure Mike McDonald is thinking about that ad Dirty as well, because neither of them had a safety quite with the pass rush ability that a healthy Jamal Adams possesses. But at the same time, of course, the new coaching staff is not going to have the allegiance to Jamal Adams that Pete Carroll and his staff had. So again, I thought that it was fairly obvious what John was suggesting is going to happen at the quarterback position. That Geno Smith is going to be Seattle's presumptive starter moving forward in 2024. I don't feel nearly as confident as that's going to be the case with Jamal Adams at safety position.
I would be stunned if he's on the roster at this point. I just think that was truly a comment trying to nicely say, well, we're looking at it, but yeah, we're looking at moving on. That's really what it boils down to. And I think most people would agree that whether fair or not, that's where things stand. He's just not been healthy, and he hasn't been the same player when he has been healthy. And so for the money that they're paying him, you've got to make a move there. Now, maybe there's a chance they could bring him back if the market is lukewarm. Maybe they could bring him back on a new contract. But right now, I would suspect that he is not going to be with the Seattle Seahawks next year. And I'd be 99.9% sure on that front. We are in Indianapolis. At least I'm in Indianapolis for the Combine. And we've got some workouts coming up here shortly. And we're going to start off with defensive linemen and linebackers. We're going to take a quick look at defensive tackles, edge rushers, and off-ball linebackers coming up next here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, such as who's going to make the first basket of the night. Live same-game parlays, including LeBron James and Anthony Davis to score 25 points in the Lakers' next game, and exclusive props, such as King James scoring his 40,000th point and much more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. You're listening to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Don't forget to check out Locked On's new 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for your 24/7 coverage of the top sports stories of the day with local experts from Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. We're going to go from my neck of the woods, which is reporting NFL coverage at the Combine, to Rob Rang's money and bread, and that is going to be the NFL draft, the Combine. And this is certainly an interesting year when you're looking at different position groups. And I think the groups we're going to see first in workouts on Thursday, the linebackers, defensive ends, and defensive tackles. This is truly a well-rounded group in the sense of depth, because defensive line, pretty strong. Edge rushers, it's kind of top-heavy. Linebackers, really thin. And so when you look at these three position groups, there's certainly talent at all three. But when teams are evaluating these positions starting on Thursday, and obviously meetings are going to be going on as well, you are going to quickly see that one position group has a lot more depth than the other two when we're looking at these groups.
Yeah, no question about it, Corbin. I really like the defensive tackle group. I think that it is better than people are portraying it. It does not have a guy that I think necessarily warrants a top 5, top 10 selection, but I think that there are a couple of intriguing candidates that might be available to Seattle at number 16. And when it comes to the Combine workouts, I mean, I'm just fascinated by what, say, a former running back like Byron Murphy II from Texas is going to be able to do. Jerzon Newton is a commonly projected player to the Seahawks. I'm curious to see what he is going to do. Clemson's got an athlete, Rook Orororo, who is an absolute fantastic athlete that I'm really curious to see what he works out like. And here from the Pacific Northwest kind of area, I'm particularly intrigued to see what Brandon Dorless, to me, one of the most underrated defensive linemen in this class. He's not necessarily the same caliber of athlete as the three men I just mentioned, but he might just be the most instinctive defensive lineman in this class. Led all the country in terms of defensive linemen in tipped passes at the line of scrimmage. I think that's really indicative of the type of intelligent football player that he is, and I know that he's a physical player as well. So to me, he checks a lot of the boxes that I anticipate that Mike McDonald is going to be looking for. So I agree with you. The pass rushers, there's some intriguing athletes there. I'm curious to see how Leatu Latu does, because I don't see that elite athleticism that I see for, say, a Dallas Turner or a Jared Verse, or certainly a Chop Robinson of Penn State. Again, these are all players the Seahawks have been linked to in lots of different mock drafts. I'm also intrigued about the linebacker position, but again, I got to kind of shut my mouth because I will ramble on about this particular topic and give you a little bit of mic time as well.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at the defensive line, one name that you did not mention, and we've talked about him a couple times on here, Texas A&M has been a really disappointing program the last few years. That's why Jimbo Fisher is currently unemployed, because he really struggled to take 4- and 5-star recruits and turn that team into an upper echelon squad in the SEC the way that he was getting paid to do. It basically ended up being a example of putting money on fire, like in the Batman movies. The Joker's going to light it all up. That's what it was. But McKinley Jackson was not part of that problem. And we're talking about a 325, 330 pound defender that can play nose. He can play three tech. I even watched him play some big end. He's got that kind of athleticism at that size. And I think that's really the calling card for this defensive line class. When you look at players like a Byron Murphy II, Jerzon Newton, somebody like McKinley Jackson, these guys are all really athletic defensive tackles. Even the bigger bodied guys like Chris Jenkins, those guys can all move, and they are going to put that on display. And so I think that's maybe what I'm most excited about with this combine is just watching these big fellas run like they're linebackers. I mean, these guys are incredible athletes. And you mentioned Aurora from Clemson. I probably butchered his name because it is a tongue twister, but watching Clemson's tape, I can't keep my eyes off this guy. And he reminds me quite a bit of Justin Matabuke with the Ravens. When he was coming out of Texas A&M, you're looking at a player that went from 2 sacks to 4.5 sacks to 5 sacks over the last 3 years. He's really developed as a pass rusher. He's developed some counter moves. He's got a really quick first step, 8 tackles for loss each of the last 3 years. So Aurora is a player that I actually would think Mike McDonald is going to be really excited about. And he's another one that could have a fantastic combine. So I think this D line, this D tackle group is fun. As for the edge group, as I mentioned earlier, I think that it is really top heavy. I think Dallas Turner has a chance to be an absolute superstar at the NFL. If Chop Robinson can turn his physical tools into production, that guy could be a phenomenal NFL player. But I feel like a lot of the top prospects in this class, there are some significant question marks. I wonder about Jared Verse holding up as a run defender at the next level. I wonder the same thing about Braylon Trice, who's probably a day 2, maybe even early 3rd round type selection. And even Brandon Dorless, who you mentioned, who's played a little bit inside, he can play a little bit outside. I'm wondering about how he holds up against the run. So I feel like there's a lot more question marks for me with the edge rushing group than what there is with the defensive tackles.
Definitely. I 100% agree with that. I'm confident in Dorless. I'm confident in Braylon Trice in terms of the running game, but I definitely agree that the defensive tackle class has more players that I believe, and they might be defensive ends in Mike McDonald's system, but we're talking about guys who are north of 285 pounds kind of a thing. Whereas the edge rusher group, we have a lot of guys who are 250 pounds that in the case of, say, a Chop Robinson, he is basically a speed rusher at this point. Now, a very, very talented one at that, but still is a guy that I don't know is going to be able to hold up quite as well in the running game. I'm going to switch to the position that I'm most intrigued by just because of the fact that the Seahawks obviously have all the free agents there, and that's the inside linebacker position. I'm especially curious to see how Junior Colson, I talked about him in yesterday's show as well, Corbin, but to me, he is the linebacker that just makes the most sense for so many different ways. Not only the fact that he has the size that I think fits in as a traditional 3-4 downhill run stuffing linebacker, 6'2", 247 pounds is what he was listed at by Michigan. But of course, it has the experience in Mike McDonald's system as well, and is just an absolute thumper. And that is one of the things that I miss about the Seahawks defenses that we saw have such great success in past years, is they were the most physical team or most physical unit on the field. And that was not the case for the last couple of seasons. I think that Colson can help you do that. You've talked about Cedric Gray as another linebacker I'm very high on. Edgerrin Cooper from Texas A&M is another one that, and I think that you nailed it when you kind of were critical of Jimbo Fisher and the lack of production that the Aggies had. But again, as you said with McKinley Jackson, same thing here with Edgerrin Cooper. You can see that these are 5-star recruit kind of guys that are going to be very successful in the NFL. And finally, Peyton Wilson from North Carolina State. Yep. Corbin, he plays the game the way you want it to be played. It's not so much the athletic testing I'm intrigued by with him. It's going to be the medical evaluations that come through with Peyton Wilson, because he has unfortunately struggled with injuries. But my goodness, you watch a guy who just plays with his hair on fire, and including against the rival North Carolina. I mean, he was all over the field. He was better than the North Carolina quarterback Drake May, who of course is projected by a lot of people, myself included, to be a top 5 pick. I thought Peyton Wilson was the best player on the field field in that game. So to me, that is what the combine is all about, is to see if these elite athletes actually test as well as expected. And then, of course, we're always looking for those guys that maybe nobody is talking about right now that ends up making the Lucas Oil Stadium their kind of personal playground.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Peyton Wilson, because I think if you took the injury history out of the equation, that he has a very good chance to be a first-round pick. This is the kind of playmaker we're talking about. He had 6 sacks this year. He had 3 interceptions this past season. So he's got the mobility to be able to cover. I mean, this is a guy that I would not be shocked if he gets into the 4.4s in the 40-yard dash. He's that kind of an athlete. But the injuries have been a major problem. He's torn his ACL twice. I'm going to put the picture up for our YouTube viewers so you can see again the brace on his right knee. That is concerning for me because he's had so many significant knee injuries up to this point in his career. When he's healthy, he's phenomenal. This is a guy that gets in the backfield. He picks off passes. He is a really good blitzer. He is the complete package. The issue is availability here. Is he going to be available for you to be able to use those skills? And as far as players that could be the wild card to watch from this group, I'm going to throw a name out there that isn't getting talked about as much, and I'm a little bit surprised on that front, and that's Tommy Eichenberg from Ohio State. He's the opposite of Peyton Wilson. He is not going to light up the combine. I don't think. He's not a guy that's going to run in the 4.4s. He'll probably run in the 4.7s. He is not an explosive athlete, but he's extremely productive and he's instinctive. This is a guy that plays faster than what he's going to test when you watch the film. And his senior year wasn't as good, but you watch the junior tape. I think if he came out last year, he's probably picked in the first couple of rounds. And I'm seeing 5th and 6th round from some people on it. I think this is a damn good football player that is kind of hovering under the radar right now.
I agree with you. I think we're talking about a top 100 kind of a guy. I don't think that he is a future superstar. I feel very confident that Tommy Eichenberg can come into the NFL and start as a rookie. And I don't feel that way about many of the linebackers in this class.
Yeah, I think that he's a guy that is being overlooked here. And I'll tell you what, if he goes out and does better than expecting, that is a guy in athletic testing that could make or break some big bucks for him. Because if he's able to run and test well agility-wise, there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to be like, you know what? He has good film. Now we can couple that with better athleticism than expected. Maybe he gets back into that day 2 territory, but he's certainly one that I'm going to be watching closely when testing goes on Thursday. And looking forward to talking to him tomorrow as well at the Combine. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe and follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we return tomorrow, there's a chance there's going to be 3 hosts as we break down quarterbacks, receivers, and running backs, all the skill players going into the Friday workouts. We're going to talk about it on Wednesday with the schedule of the Combine. Going to be a jam-packed episode. Make sure you're listening in. Thanks for tuning in tonight. Go Hawks.